Welcome to the Press On Podcast, Ep.04. I am so glad you are joining us, whether you're watching us on YouTube or you're listening to us on Apple Podcast or Spotify or Podbean or one of the other many podcast platforms you're listening to us on. We are so glad you are joining us. I am honored that you would take a couple minutes just to hang out with me today, whether this is your first time or you're here every single week. I'm so glad you are here, and I want to say thank you for joining us to the Press On Podcast. My name is Justin, and I just really want to start today off with some motivation to get us going. And this week, I've had a lot of time just to dream, to reflect, and really think about what do I want in the future? What do I want with this podcast in the future? And I've been rereading one of my favorite books by my favorite author. Maybe you've heard of him. His name is Bob Goff. He has a book called Dream Big. And he had two quotes that I really just wanted to share with you today and encourage you. Number one, he says this is, you can't change what happened yesterday or 5 minutes ago, but tomorrow is all yours. And it's up to you to decide what is next. And then he also says, it's fun to sit and daydream, but if that's all we do, we're not really on the path to accomplish anything. And it's this whole idea of we all have dreams, we all have ambitions and aspirations, but if all we ever do is think about it, then it's never going to happen. We got to get up and we got to move. We got to decipher if this is worth pursuing, if this is really our calling, if what we really want is worth enough for us to give it our all. And so no matter where you are in life, I know you have a dream. I know you have an aspiration that you want to achieve. And maybe you can't even verbalize it because you're not quite sure what it is. But I want to encourage you to start thinking through that. Start trying to write it down or figure out what you want to accomplish in your life. You'll be so glad you did. If you need some inspiration, read Dream Big by Bob Goff, or he has a podcast of his own called Dream Big, and I encourage you to check that out. They put out an episode, I think, every single week with different guests that Bob sits down with, and they just really talk about what it looks like to follow your dreams when there's setbacks or when you don't know what's ahead. It's a great podcast. Dream Big, Bob Goff, great stuff. And so, like I promised you last week, we're bringing back Improv Illustrations today. And if you're new with us and you don't know what Improv Illustration is, we did this a couple of weeks ago. In this bucket, I have a couple of random nouns. And if you have any nouns for us, just drop us an email at pressonpod@gmail.com, and I'll throw them in the bucket. And what I do is I randomly select a noun, and I'll give you an illustration how it relates to life or our faith, and I just try to come up with something on the spot. But then the second part of that is I challenge you to do the same thing. And so with that same word, I encourage you to take a video of yourself this week, or email me, or find ways to get it to us, and we'll share it next week. But find ways to interact with Improv Illustration as well. And so, again, I don't know what these are. It's been a couple weeks since I put them in this bucket. And so we'll see what I draw. It's not rigged. You can see if you're watching. There's a bunch of different slips of paper in here. ASMR for the listeners. But here we go. The word is... We did this one last time, so I'm just going to throw it out because we already did the word tree. I don't know why I put it back in there. The word for this week, though, is softball. And sometimes in life, we're thrown softballs. They're a little bit bigger to hit. They're a little bit easier to hit than a baseball. But sometimes we think, I don't really know where I'm going with this. Sometimes we think the things that are thrown our way, we're going to be able to knock out of the park because it seems bigger and it seems easy to just accomplish. But sometimes those bigger obstacles, it's a little bit more difficult than we realize. We underestimate what they can do. We overestimate ourselves. And so when life throws you an obstacle, whether it's a big obstacle or one that you think you can easily tackle, don't ever underestimate those obstacles, but do your best to knock it out of the park each and every time. And are you going to make a home run every time? Probably not. But maybe you get a single or a double or a triple, and hey, that's okay too. As long as you swing for the fences the best you can each and every time. That's Improv Illustration. I don't know if it makes sense, but that's all I got for Improv Illustrations this week. Hey, another awesome thing happened this week, and I'm so excited to share with you what it was. Check this video out if you're watching on YouTube.
Guys, it's here. All right, after several weeks of waiting, it's finally here. I'm so excited to see the final product. So this is the unboxing, and so let's see how it turned out.
Unwrap it.
Guys, introducing officially the Press On Podcast coffee mug. It's so awesome. So limited quantities of these are available. We are selling these for $10 a piece plus shipping and handling. Or if you live somewhere near me where I can deliver it, I'll be happy to do that. But all the proceeds go to support the podcast. Or if you're one of the first 5 supporters on Patreon, we want to give you one of these for free as a way of saying thank you. Like I said, limited quantity. We won't ever make something like this again. So if you want to say you had one of the very first Press On Podcast coffee mugs, make sure you get one as soon as possible. And tomorrow on all of our social media, we will be posting how you can get one of these, how you can order one. So be watching for that. Press On Podcast coffee mugs. I'm so excited.
Yeah, that's right. We now have coffee cups with our logo on them. They're so awesome. I'm so glad they are finally here. We've been planning this for a couple of weeks now. And guess what? They are going on sale tomorrow. So check out our Facebook, our Instagram for all the details about that. So you can know how you can get your hands on these coffee cups. There are very limited quantities. So you're going to want to make sure you get these because these are the first ever Press On Podcast cups. And even if we do cups in the future, who can say that they had one of the very first, one of the originals? I hope you can. And if you become a Patreon supporter, a regular supporter of our podcast, if you're one of the first 5 Patreon supporters, we want to give you one of these cups absolutely free, just as a thank you for becoming a supporter. And so if you're interested in becoming a Patreon supporter of this show, make sure you check out the show notes. The link is right there. You can see the different tiers, and based on how much you can give each and every month, what you get in return for those as well. But you can also make a one-time gift on Patreon if you would like to do that as well. Well, I also mentioned our social media tomorrow. You want to be checking that out, but always be following our social media. We have Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and, of course, our YouTube. Be sure to be checking all that out because who knows? There might be a contest pop up on there or some quotes or just random thoughts by me or some of our friends. So be checking out our social media because you're not going to want to miss the things that we are posting. And that leads me into our next pretty big announcement. I'm so excited to announce that today, June 30th, 2021, we are launching our Facebook community group. You see, from day one of this podcast, we've always said that this is a podcast made by broken, imperfect, messed up people, made for broken, messed up, imperfect people. And we want this to be a community where we can grow with each other, where we learn from each other, where we have fun together, and we just do life together. It was never meant to be just me speaking to a screen or my voice talking through an app to you. This was always meant to be a community, And this is one of those ways that we are going to utilize social media in order to form a community. So in this group, you're going to be able to post questions or engage in dialogue with each other, not just me. This is going to be a place where if you have dreams or aspirations, you can actually write it down in a safe place where there's not going to be people to judge you and say, no, you can't do that, but people who will encourage you in your dreams. This is going to be a place where if you're not understanding what you're reading in Scripture, you can ask questions and people can try to help each other work through Scripture together. This is going to be a place where if you need somebody to pray for you, you can post prayer requests and we join together. I don't want to always be in front as a teacher. I want to be sitting side by side with all of you, learning from you as well, because I don't have it together. And so this community group is going to be a great way that we can really embrace this idea of community. And so I hope today, when we launch this, you'll go on Facebook, just type in Press On Community on Facebook, and hopefully you'll find us. If not, just message me, email me at pressonpod@gmail.com, and I'll make sure you get a link to our Facebook group. Well, this week, as I was dreaming about the podcast and where I would like to see it in the future, I started writing down some goals. As you probably have seen, I have this notebook every single week. It says big ideas on the front, but it's my show notes each and every week. But every now and then I have pages of just dreams and goals. And as I was writing goals for the podcast, I also wrote some goals for myself, like from what I want to get out of doing a podcast. And when it came to the book of Galatians, I simply wrote that I want to have a deeper understanding of this book, because it's easy to pick out the nice fluffy verses that we like and we can quote from this book, but I feel like there's so much deeper things going on with this book, and I want to gain a deeper understanding. Well, then I move into reading chapter 2, which is where we are today, and man, was there a lot. I mean, this was a theologically complex chapter, and I don't know if you felt the way I did while reading it, but for me, it was a little bit difficult to understand. I got lost. I was confused. Paul, as writing, and he refers to Peter as Peter, but then he changes it and starts calling him Cephas, and you're like, what in the world? You think at first it's two different people, but then after some research, you find out it's not two different people, and it could be confusing. And when Scripture gets confusing, if you're like me, you just kind of read through it. You're like, all right, at least I got through it. And you call it good. But man, there's so much more if we just dug a little bit deeper. And so I really want to encourage you to research. Google things, look in different sources and books. And when I say different sources and books, or when I say Google, I want you to Google more than one thing, because I want you to see some comparisons. Because it's easy to find the first thing that we read and be like, oh, that's what's happening here. But maybe there's different ways to interpret it. And as we read different sources, we can kind of come to a conclusion, maybe not land on one side or the other, but kind of get a general sense of what's happening. And I know this isn't a book recommendation week. I already recommended one book. But this book right here, it's called Haley's Bible Handbook, has been one of the greatest sources for me. I've had it for almost 11 years now, but it's been a great source for me. But essentially what I'm trying to get at is that in this book, it's every Bible book, but then it's broke down. It gives you backgrounds on who wrote it, what it's about, and then it kind of breaks down each chapter in a very condensed way and kind of gives you thoughts on each thing. And this is one thing that I go to when I don't understand a passage very well. And there's a lot of different books, a lot of different sources out there. I just wanted to give you one that you could easily grab. But if you don't want to buy books or you don't have an extensive library, Google is a great tool as well. There's a lot of Bible apps out there as well. So find what works for you. Make sure you're researching when you don't understand things. And so looking at chapter 2 today, again, there's a lot here. There's a lot we can say. following up from last week, we're seeing Paul's testimony, but we also kind of learned that there's been some conflict between Paul and Peter. See, if you don't know a lot about church history or the New Testament, when Jesus died and rose again and the church first started, many people thought that in order to be a Jesus follower, you had to be Jewish. You couldn't be a Gentile. A Gentile is simply a non-Jewish person. But as the church began to grow, so did this inclusion of Gentiles. And thank goodness, because you and I are Gentiles because we're not Jewish. And both Paul and Peter in the New Testament say that this is the way God wanted, that Christ died for everybody, not just the Jew, not just the Gentile, but for everybody. But it seems to be that in this passage that Peter kind of went back on his word. First he said it was okay, but then he got really scared of the Judaizers that were in the area. We talked about Judaizers last week. They're the ones that say, no, you have to follow the law. These would be the people that say, no, only Jewish people can be Christian. And so it seems like Peter kind of went back on his word because of his fear of the Judaizer. And Paul is kind of upset with Peter here. And a lot of people wonder if this is creating some tension in reading the New Testament. Who's right, Paul or Peter? Paul or Peter? And I think both, because when we read Acts chapter 15, which would have been after this book was written, if our timelines are correct, we can see that Peter really does say that Gentiles are included, and Gentiles were died for when Jesus died. I think what happens is that Peter, he was a follower of Jesus, and he grew up essentially a Judaizer, and then Jesus dies, and he's doing his best, but he's kind of struggling with his old beliefs and his new beliefs, and so he kind of leans back into his old beliefs, whereas Paul, he was converted after Jesus rose, and he heard that salvation was for everybody, the sinner and the saint, the Jewish and the non-Jewish, and so Peter had this struggle with what he used to believe and his now new belief, and where Paul has just kind of always believed this thing. And so I don't think Peter's much unlike you and I, whereas a long time ago we might have thought a certain way or believed a certain thing, and every now and then that gets stuck in our head. I mean, we see this, right, in American life, that the older generations kind of are stuck in older ways when things have changed since then, and it's hard for them to adjust to newer things, but it doesn't necessarily mean the newer ways are bad. It's just harder to adjust when you've lived a certain way for so long. And so all of that came from me doing some research, because just reading through that, I would understand what it's saying, but I wouldn't have really grasped what was going on here. And I just want to end with a reading of verses 20 and 21. Paul writes this: I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. I do not set aside the grace of God, for if righteousness could be gained through the law, Christ died for nothing. I think a lot of times people say, when you become a Christian and you give your all for Jesus, you are becoming a robot. You are losing your personality. And I don't think Paul is saying this. I don't think Paul is giving up his personality for Jesus. I think what he is doing is he's giving up his right to let his desires and his passions control where he goes. I think he's giving Christ that control. And he's saying, hey, no matter how I feel, no matter what I believe, I'm putting that aside, and I'm letting you dictate where I go, how I treat people, and what I do. And I think this kind of plays into his relationship with Peter, because even if he's frustrated with Peter, he's putting that aside, and he's saying, Jesus, no matter what I think, no matter what I believe, I'm putting that aside to follow you, and treating Peter the same way that you would have treated Peter, with love and grace and understanding. And I love this part that he says this: I don't set aside the grace of God, for if righteousness could be gained through the law, Christ would have died for nothing. And it kind of goes back to what we talked about last week, where we sometimes focus on just doing the good things because we think that's what we're supposed to be doing. But if that's all we focus on, and we don't focus on the grace of Jesus and the fact that he died for every single person, if we only focus on the law, then Jesus died for nothing. Like, we would have had the law no matter if Jesus would have died or not. But sometimes we just got to lean into that grace. And I don't know what it is for you. Maybe you've messed up in your past, and maybe some days you just don't feel worthy. Well, lean into that grace of Jesus. Maybe somebody's hurt you, and somebody caused disruption in your relationship with them or relationships with other people, and you have a hard time forgiving them. Lean into that grace. Don't worry about what was right and wrong. Lean into that grace. Put aside your feelings and your wants and your desires and ask yourself, how would Jesus be treating this person? And then you get to go do the same. And I love that, especially when we think about our dreams and our aspirations. Think about this. What if we put away our worries and our fears and what we think is logical, and we put all that aside, and we really honed in on what Jesus wants for us? And we lean into that grace and we say, hey, I might think I know, but I really want to just follow wherever you're leading me. Do we have enough faith to lean into that grace, to follow Jesus no matter what? Whether it's in relationships or in employment or in where we're living or how we treat strangers we meet each and every day. I hope that we can lean in to that grace. I'm loving this book, and I'm learning to love it deeper and more each and every day. I hope you are too. I hope what I said makes a little bit of sense. If not, or you have pushback or you have things you want to add, don't forget, we love having discussions. And so write us, pressonpod@gmail.com. Comment on the show if you're watching on YouTube. But let us know what you think. What do you like? What do you don't like? What do you wish you really understood about this book? What more would you add? Am I missing something? Because I know I probably am. But I want to hear from you as well. Hey, we got another great show coming at you next week. We're going to dive into chapter 3, so make sure you are reading that. And hey, this week, take some time to daydream about your future dreams, aspirations. But don't just daydream. Take one practical step to achieve that dream. And as you do and you experience pushback and setbacks, I hope you are able to do one thing, and that is to press on. We can't wait to see you next week. Until then, adios.